Well, hello, everyone. I love seeing all of these faces joining us this morning. Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Lorelle, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your moderator today as we launch this incredible new book, From Conflict to Convergence, Coming Together to Solve Tough Problems. Huge shout out and thanks to the publisher Wiley, and of course to all of you for taking time out of your day to join us for this discussion. So we're going to get right to it. More people are joining us as we come in. We had over 100 folks registered today, so we are beyond thrilled to welcome all of you. Again, my name is Linda Lorelle. For those of you who don't know me, I am a journalist and an entrepreneur. I'm the CEO and executive producer of Linda Lorelle Media. I'm the co-founder of Civil Dialogues, a new democracy initiative, and I am a very proud board member of Convergence. I remember well the day that I met Rob Fersh, and here I am many years later, just so thrilled to be involved in the important work that this organization does. And that work is highlighted in this new book. Here it is, folks, hot off the presses. If you haven't already ordered your copy, now would be a good time to do so. And I hope after this conversation, you will just run to get your copy ordered. So I was one of the fortunate ones who had an opportunity to get an advance copy because I was asked to write an endorsement. And here is what I wrote, because I think some of you might feel this way as well. If you have thrown up your hands and decided there is no way to talk to, let alone understand the other, don't give up just yet. There is a path forward, and it's in this book. Insightful, easy to read, and packed with memorable stories, From Conflict to Convergence shows the author's advice in action and inspires you to give it a try yourself. The perfect book at the perfect time to show us how to resolve our differences with respect for each other's humanity. I can't think of a more timely book than this. We all read the headlines every day. We all watch the news. We know what's going on in the country. We know how divided we are. And this book helps us get to how we can overcome that. It is such an important book. And we're really grateful to some of the publications that have already highlighted the great work in this book, thanks to the Fulcrum, the Einhorn Collaborative, Interfaith America, and the Greater Good Science Center. Now, many of you on this call already know who Rob Fersh and Mariah Levison are, but for those of you who don't, I will briefly just give you a little snippet about who each one of them is. Rob Fersh founded Convergence in 2009 and served as its first CEO until 2020. He has spent more than 45 years bridging policy differences and moving important public policy solutions forward in Washington, D.C., working for Congress, in the executive branch, and in leading nonprofit organizations. Mariah Levison serves as CEO and president of Convergence. Mariah is a seasoned consensus builder who excels in bringing diverse groups together to address critical state and national issues. Her expertise extends to speaking and training on a national and international level, engaging with a wide range of audiences, including local communities, law schools, foreign governments, and TED, as in TED Talks. Mariah, Rob, I am beyond thrilled that we are here to debut the launch of your new book. Rob, I'm going to start with you. I want you both to answer this question, but why this book? Why now? And what does it mean to you that we're finally here?
Well, Linda, thank you so much for hosting us. And Linda is one of many people already on this call who've made such a huge contribution to Convergence over the years. We just wouldn't be here, but for the collective efforts of so many people. I see a lot of other old family friends, old friends and members of the family on. So thank you for joining us. I think this is a moment where I think both Mariah and I wanted to write a book. We could share our experience, our direct experience. We're practitioners, we're not theoreticians, about what it feels like and how it can be done successfully to bring people together across divisions. And the goal of the book is to inspire and equip people to use collaborative problem solving wherever they can in their lives, whether it's in their personal lives, whether it's in their professional lives, their business lives, or in their community or political or policy lives. So our goal very much at this moment, especially when the country is so divided, is to provide a basis for people to learn how to come together to solve big problems. And in that process, hopefully reduce the polarization we have in this country a good bit. So that's my opening. Linda, and turn it over to Mariah.
Yeah, Mariah, what would you like to add to that?
Sure. Well, thank you, Linda, so much for moderating this conversation today. And of course, Rob, it's been such a joy to write this book with you. Well, parts of it have been a joy. Writing a book is really hard if anyone hasn't done it. So, but it has been a joy doing it together. And it is always such a joy to be a part of this community that Rob played such a huge part in creating and that I feel so blessed to be a part of now. So just appreciate everyone being here today. And we are certainly excited to share the book. And I think that the reasons that we wrote it, mine are the same as Rob's, but if I didn't do what I feel so lucky to get to do for a living, I would be so discouraged by the dominant message out there that we're hopelessly divided, and increasingly that, whoever the other side is, whatever that means for people, is, awful or dangerous or even evil, and that we might as well give up on each other, give up on problem solving, even give up on democracy and burrow deeper into our own echo chambers. And so I just feel so fortunate to having, spent, most every day of my professional life bringing people together across their divides. And what I have seen firsthand from that is that we aren't as divided as it seems from, things that we see in the media and the way folks are talking these days. And not only are we not as divided, but that we really can solve some of our big challenges, that it's not that it's easy, but it's reliable. And the things that we do work pretty predictably to help people find ways to solve their shared challenges that don't compromise their values or their principles. And we just wanted to really share that hope that we get to feel with others and to inspire them and equip them to try some of these approaches that have worked so well for us.
And, one of the things that I love about the book is that it really can be utilized by anyone. It's on the person-to-person level, whether it's family member to family member or business colleague to business colleague, or on the broader scale where you're dealing with large groups of people. Rob, I know that when Convergence puts together a collaborative where you're bringing stakeholders together from across the spectrum, so much thought and process goes into it. And one of the guiding principles is the mindset as you're bringing these people together from disparate points of view. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of mindset in collaborative problem solving and the whole idea of dialogue versus debate?
Yeah, no, thanks, Linda. And also let me just say what a joy it's been to work with Mariah, not only on Convergence, but on the book, considering all the things she's been juggling to lead the organization and still get a book done. And she's added such depth to the book that I think we've been a great combination on that. So kudos to you, Mariah. Now I've already lost track of the questions about mindsets.
Mindset and dialogue versus debate.
Yeah, so yes, let me start with dialogue versus debate. I mean, there's nothing wrong in having good debate. In fact, many people prefer that word. But in dialogue, it's a matter of really listening carefully to the other side, not trying to so much win the debate as understand each other, and potentially even to look at areas of commonality, which is what we do there. And when you're in a dialogue, you're learning, you're there to learn from the other side and to be contributed to by the other side, and to potentially end up with some insights that would not otherwise occur when you're just trying to think about what's the next point you're going to make to win the debate. So that's sort of a basic distinction about it. But your other question, I think, is very fundamental. And the book starts with describing a series of mindsets, 5 of them, which we think are essential for effective collaborative problem solving. And so, so among them are things like just having an attitude that conflict can be constructive. I think most of us are conflict averse, but when you realize that differences of opinion help people push thinking to a higher level, then you can understand that having some degree of conflict, as long as it's not destructive or too personal, can really be a great attitude to have to learn and to potentially come up with answers that are better than anyone started with. Another mindset we call for is giving others the benefit of the doubt, which, you know, is something that not everyone enters our room feeling that way. Most people come in a bit scared, a bit fearful, a little bit worried about how they're going to do, or worried about having to talk to their enemies. And we urge that mindset to suspend judgment and to listen and to get deeply related to other people, which is another part of the mindsets we recommend, so that you can at least listen with an open heart, not, again, trying to just respond, and assume that there's good faith by other people. So these, and in many cases, that mindset doesn't arrive until people are partway through or midway through their processes with us. And that when you do that, when you begin to hear from people directly from their hearts about what they believe and what their values are, you tend to be able to give other people the benefit of the doubt. So there are several other mindsets, but I think it's really important that both before you come in and even once you're in the room trying to do collaborative problem solving, that you begin to develop some attitudes and mindsets where you try on for size the fact that for you to win, others do not have to lose, that it's possible to find higher ground where people can find answers of mutual benefit, where as many people's needs as possible can be met. And if you go in with that attitude, it's different than going in armed to the teeth, trying to win the debate, as opposed to getting curious, which is another mindset we recommend, to learn more from others and potentially find answers that work for everybody.
And then another big piece of that, maybe even the next piece, is developing trust. So Mariah, can you explain why the trust factor is so critical to this process?
Rob and I both think that a lot of these challenges, whether they're, Rob and I have spent both of our careers working mostly on public policy issues, though I started out working on disputes between families and community members as well. But whether they are big public policy issues or issues, again, at the community, neighborhood, family level, it's generally been my experience that it's not that the issues are so complicated that's why we're getting stuck. It's more that it's a people problem. And when these challenges get stuck, it's because stuff between people has gotten stuck. And so I think in large part, this work is about building relationships. I always think of the work as we go slow at the beginning as we build trust and we build relationships. And I think of that as the harder part of the work. That's where I have this visual of like pushing a boulder up a hill. And then once that's done and that foundation is there, it just sort of rolls down the other side and people agree to all kinds of stuff that at the outset seemed like they could never get there. So that building of relationships, building of trust creates the foundation that enables people to adopt some of the mindsets that Rob was talking about, going from thinking other people have negative intentions or motives, or they're up to things, to thinking, oh, wow, I didn't understand that experience that person had, or that perspective, or I didn't understand all of the different needs or concerns that someone was raising with a particular position that didn't really excavate all that was underneath that. And then folks, they find what they have in common, and they work. It's not just about finding what they have in common. They work through what their differences are so that they have a deeper understanding of them. And that creates the trust to then do the work of finding those solutions, which does sometimes involve some compromise at that level. It's not at that point about compromising values or principles. It's about how we achieve those shared goals and values. There's some differences of opinions there, but those are generally the kinds of differences that are a constructive level of conflict, and that relationship piece enables people to navigate those differences.
One of the things that I think the book does brilliantly is highlight the stories, because we learn through stories and we feel through stories, and there's so many wonderful stories in the book. Some of them are related to the work that Convergence does with Congress, and with other groups that you've brought together. But then some of them are also more personal. I'm going to read a little something, and Rob, I'm going to ask you to start. This is a quote from someone in the first chapter, and this was on the healthcare roundtable. And this person's name is Carla. And then Rob, I'm going to read the quote, and then I'm going to ask you to fill in the blanks in the backstory of what this led to, or what led to this, I should say. So here's what she writes. I came into this process thinking the AMA and I really had the right answers on how to provide healthcare coverage for all Americans. We had done our homework, researching and considering the options, she said. But for the last 2 years, I've been listening to thoughtful and well-meaning people with widely different perspectives who made points and arguments that never crossed my mind. I just can't see the world the way I used to. My whole understanding of the issues and potential solutions has changed. Rob, give us the backstory. And when I read that, it gives me chills, because that's really what we're going for, right? We want people to open their minds and say, I never thought of it that way. And just because I didn't look at it the way you do doesn't make you a monster.
Well, Linda, thank you for that. And I'm going to choke up in a second. Because Carla, who had become a very good friend, passed away a few years ago from cancer, and her husband, Greg Baker, is on this call. So it's my honor to welcome Greg and to honor her memory. And she's, of all the things she did, which she was a great participant in that project, which occurred from 2004 to 2007, is that she gave me this story, if you will, to include in the book and to tell, because it's probably my best story, and I appreciate your raising it. And the background was that in the United States, for decades, people had disagreement about how to cover the uninsured, and the uninsured were the casualties. So that when I had an inkling to organize a project on healthcare coverage to the uninsured starting in 2003 and before Convergence, it's the success that led to me having the confidence to start Convergence. There were an estimated 48 million Americans who did not have healthcare coverage. And a lot of the people involved in healthcare policy at very high levels had already been at war during the Clinton years. If some people remember, there was a famous plan that Hillary Clinton led the fight on for her husband, Bill Clinton. And it divided the country. There were national commercials and people at each other's throats. They disagreed on how to cover the uninsured. So we decided with help, I don't know if he's on this call, Rob, with special help from Ron Pollock, who's very active with Convergence, and others, to see if we could organize a dialogue on how to cover the uninsured in the United States. And it turned out people wanted to be at the table. And with Ron's help and the help of people from United Healthcare and then many, many other groups, we assembled the leading voices: hospitals, insurers, pharmaceutical companies, consumer groups, unions, businesses, the Chamber of Commerce. And we set them at a table, and what they discovered pretty quickly on was that they actually shared the goal to provide coverage, but disagreed on how to do so. And so the fact that they had a shared goal to improve coverage for as many people as quickly as possible in the United States gave us a bonding. And I don't know if Stuart Butler's on the call. Stuart, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to look at all the names, but Stuart, who's on our board, was a very instrumental player at that table. He was with the Heritage Foundation at the time, and he got it off to the right start. He basically, the first time we went around the room, where people, particularly people from further on the left, were skeptical. Oh, we're going to have the Heritage Foundation at the table. Stuart basically said, you know, we may disagree about what the role of the government needs to be to cover the uninsured, whether it should be more private sector or more public sector. And, you know, I'm in favor of market solutions, but let's have the conversation because we all agree on this goal. And that really made it safe for everybody to feel like, okay, we have a shared goal. And then what happened, just to complete this longer story than I intended, Carla was terrific. She represented the AMA beautifully, and she spoke up a lot in the beginning. And then I noticed that she'd gotten quieter and quieter. So I finally, went up to her and said, well, actually, she finally came up to me at the 11th meeting out of 12 and simply said to me, Rob, you have ruined my life. And as you said, and she said, I just can't see the world the way I used to. And so that's really what our goal is. Our goal wasn't for Carla to change all her opinions or give up her values or principles. In fact, the answers we came up with were consistent with AMA's positions, but they were broader and they had a different take. And I think if we're successful in doing that and convening people at Convergence and other people use these practices to move people out of their complete confidence that they have all the answers, to open them up to the fact that decent people can disagree and add to each other, then what happened to Carl is really very much what we'd like to see happen, not only in the work of Convergence, but in everyone who practices the art of collaborative problem solving.
It's such a beautiful story, Rob. Thank you so much for sharing it. And Greg, I hope we did justice by Carla. We're so thrilled that you're on the call. Mariah, I want you to talk now a little bit about one of the personal stories that you shared in the book about Philando Castile. So I'll just let you take it from there and tell us what you'd like us to know.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, this is also a story that's personal to me and also involves loss of life. So I was able to work with the city and community of Falcon Heights after Philando Castile, who many of you may remember the story. He was a school cafeteria worker at the St. Paul Public Schools here in Minnesota, where I live and still am, who was killed by a police officer during a traffic stop. And through the process that I was a part of, I got to become friends with many people, including his good friend. And when I shared with his mom that I would be sharing the story in the book, because really it's her story and I wanted her to know, she told me how honored she was to have the story in the book. And I thought, like, oh my goodness, I'm the one who's honored. You know, she lost her son and I'm the mom of 2 sons, and I just can't imagine that. But I share the story because for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's illustrative of how many good outcomes can come out of these types of processes. And I'll share a couple of those. And the other reason is because I think it demonstrates that this type of collaborative problem-solving approach can work on even the most divisive issues in our country, as healthcare is as well. Police community relations over the last number of years have been a very divisive issue and continue to be and are during this election season. And so after Philando was killed, members of the community were coming to the city council meetings very angry, and the council shut down meetings, and it was, you know, sort of high drama and people didn't know what to do. And so the city reached out and we set up a process to help the city and community heal. One of the stories that's told in the book is of Melanie Leahy, who is now a council member there, but she really wanted there to be an element of healing in this process, as well as making changes to policies for policing and inclusion in the city. And lots of changes came out of that process, including changes to the who and how of what policing was done, how the city handled some inclusion work. There's a memorial and a celebration of life of Philando every year. Many different important outcomes, I think. One of those Rob made me think of in the telling of his story was that early on there was identification of a shared goal, which I think is something really common in all of these processes. People come in feeling like we're, you know, for this and against this, and we have these positions that are mutually exclusive and oppositional, and it's us versus them, come in fighting. And generally, we're able to help people realize relatively quickly that they have important shared goals in common. And for this process, it was around mutual safety, recognizing that the community members needed a safe community, especially for men of color, and that also police officers needed to feel safe as well, that they do really hard and dangerous and scary work. So by centering that goal of mutual safety, lots of important outcomes were able to come out of the work. But one I want to highlight in particular, in addition to all of those sort of public policy level outcomes, is that on the first night that we had a big gathering of community members to talk about what had happened and to talk about the values that they wanted this task force that was going to make changes to be considering, and where a lot of talk of mutual safety happened. Philando's best friend, John Thompson, attended that meeting. And he told me later, because we became friends, that he wasn't planning to attend. And again, Philando's mom suggested that he go. And he said, you know, if she's suggesting that I be there, how could I not? So the community had a robust and important conversation. And then at the end of the night, quite late, I was cleaning up and finishing up. And I realized that the pastor to the church who was hosting the conversation was standing near the front doors. And I thought, oh, we need to get out of here. This poor woman is here late at night hosting us. And I realized that the 2 people who were left there in the room were John Thompson, Philando's best friend, and then the police chief at the time, whose name was also John, and they were deep in conversation. And you could see, what a deep and important conversation they were having. And I remember thinking, oh, I should really ask them to leave because this poor woman, this pastor, is standing here and it's late at night. But when do these conversations ever get to happen? It had gone from, yelling, and John will be the first to tell you that he was one of the people yelling loudest, understandably, at the city council after this happened. And here they are deep in conversation. And I learned later what an important conversation that was for them and how much they got to understand each other's perspective and what each other's experiences were like, and the challenges that, men of color face, men in law enforcement, city leaders. And so that's one of the stories that I hold closest to my heart.
Again, chills, I can picture the room, and I can see the two of them, Philando's best friend and the police chief, talking. And I can only imagine the impact that was had and felt on both sides of that conversation. And like you said, how often does a conversation like that get to take place? So I guess my question, and this is going to lead into some of the questions that many of our guests have, as they pre-registered or as they registered for the event. A lot of you submitted questions, and I'm going to start moving into that. And I invite you also, if you have questions that pop into your mind now, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But I guess the question that I have for both of you is, what would you take away from each one of those stories as tips to help those of us on the call have these kinds of conversations in whatever arena we happen to find ourselves in when there is conflict and a high level of conflict? Whoever wants to start first.
Well, I'll kick it off, Mariah, and then you can improve on this. I think the tips I simply want to give to people, and this is a little countercultural. People know I've spent many years in Washington, worked for 3 congressional committees, is that the centerpiece is the quality of relationships. And if you do what you need to do to build relationships so people understand each other, have a sense of trust, get beyond what they assume other people's motives are, that's what clears the way for people to have conversations that go deep and find areas of common ground, even if you don't have complete agreement. And I would say that's the tip. So in the book, there's lots of other related tips that say, okay, first of all, you should get centered yourself a bit. Know that you try not to enter a room or a situation, whether you're leading it or a participant, where you are ready to react too fast. So just do something that Bill Urey says in his books, is to go up to the balcony and get some distance on where you are. Then it's really important for you to, because you're patient and centered, then it's really important for you to get curious, as I said before, and listen to other people more deeply. And then you have an opportunity to look for how that person can win as well as you can win. And in many cases, in our rooms, there's not only professional relationships built, but personal friendships. So you get to the point where you're almost rooting for each other. So I think that's the tip. Whether it's a dispute within the family, get patient, listen carefully, give other people the benefit of doubt, get curious. And if so, you'll open up some new doorways to find common ground in whatever situation you're facing, whether it's in your business or your an academic campus or a house of worship where tensions I know can run high. It's just important to set that stage to really make sure you understand people. And one of the points we make in the book is that it's not good enough just to read articles or assume you understand what someone has to say just because they wrote something once. Hearing from people personally about what their own experience is, how it affected them, what led them to their beliefs, and what led them to certain emotions about the work they're doing is really important information if you want to build bridges and find answers that work for the widest possible swath of people who are involved.
I'm so glad you said that, Rob, about the face-to-face connection, having that kind of real human interaction. And we live in a digital age. We live our lives on screen. I mean, COVID forced us all on screen, and then you've got the whole social media. You got all of that to contend with, and it makes it so difficult to have real human interactions. And so that face-to-face is so critical. Mariah, what would you like to add to this part of the conversation?
Well, of course, I agree very much with everything Rob said. I think one thing that I would add that I just really center in all of the work that I've done is to try to understand, as you're getting curious and giving folks the benefit of the doubt, trying to understand that even when people do things that seem hurtful or harmful or unproductive, my experience has always been that that is generally the result of people taking a sort of unskillful approach to trying to meet some basic needs that they have for security, belonging, efficacy, or trying to address some fears they have that might be about, can I get my needs met, and you, whoever the other side is. And that if through that listening more and that being curious, we can really listen beyond some of the adversarial or positional things people say to figure out, what are these needs, fears, or concerns? What's the heart of the message underneath? And that not only sort of lowers our own defenses and enables us to build those relationships, but it also sets us on the pathway to finding these higher ground solutions of mutual gain. Because if we find out what those things are for people, those things are usually not mutually exclusive the way some of the positions that we come in with, government healthcare or private sector healthcare, or, disband the police, or, lock more people up or whatever. Underneath all of those things, there are these needs about getting healthcare for everyone, about mutual safety. And that's where we find those paths to the higher ground solutions that are of mutual benefit.
And building upon that, we have a question from Lena. Thank you, Lena. And Lena says, often power imbalance is tough to navigate in dialogue. Curious to hear your thoughts on that. Rob?
Yeah, I can start again, Ryan. Hello, Lena. It's so nice to see you. She's an old colleague from Search for Common Ground, an amazing peacemaker in her own right. And this is a question that we've always dealt with. In fact, even when I was incubating Convergence at Search for Common Ground, which was a fabulous experience for me, we had to deal with that. And let me just say, not everyone who comes to the table has equal power. And eventually it may be more important for some groups to be really happy with the solution than others, given their disproportionate power. But I'd say from my experience, we've been successful at the table, making it very, if you will, equal and horizontal. So by the ground rules we adopt, by making sure everyone gets equal time to talk or as much time as they need, by not imputing motives, it's really just the quality of the ideas that come out that begin to rise to the top. And, we create an ethic and a culture in that room where everyone is an equal and treated so. And it's the quality of the ideas and the emotions that they present that people respond to. And I can't tell you how many times in which ideas presented by someone who was probably not from the most influential group in the room carried the day because of the quality of the ideas. So there are challenges in the room, but I think we've done a very good job, and our experience suggests that it's possible in that room to make it quite horizontal, that almost everybody feels that they have something to contribute, and each according to their own ability in the room, and that it's respected, and that there's a culture that actually gets formed in the room where people watch out for each other. At least that's my experience in project after project, that everybody is sort of pulling for everybody to contribute what they can. But Mariah, I'd be very interested if you have a different take on the power issue.
No, just one thing I would add. I think Rob did a good job laying out that we have generally, Rob and I, had the benefit of using these extensive processes, which give us a bunch of different tools to address power imbalances about who's there and who speaks when, and all different kinds of tools, which are in the book. But another thing that I would say about this question that I think I hope is a call to action from the book, is that another important way to balance power is that when leaders call for collaborative problem solving approaches and say, I'm willing to support whatever outcome the full range of stakeholders can come to together, recognizing that is, as the leader, that is very unlikely to be an extreme outlier sort of outcome, because if you really get that full range of perspectives into the room and you're willing to support and champion whatever kind of consensus higher ground solution those folks can come out with, when leaders call for that and use these types of approaches, that helps a lot with the power imbalance too, because they can set the container to say, we're looking for a solution here that truly reflects all of the perspectives, those of the folks who have some more power and those of the folks who have less. So that can be really helpful with the power imbalance. And we kind of close the book calling for that kind of collaborative leadership and calling on more leaders to be a convener and call people together more often to develop these types of solutions.
Thank you for sharing that, Mariah. And I'm going to ask you to chime in on this next question too, because I think it speaks to the Philando Castile story that you shared. How do you deal with high emotions and deal with the need for the needs for greater calmness? And that's from Robert. Thank you, Robert.
So I think calm comes generally from letting folks work through those high emotions, but doing it in a well-structured setting. And I've spent my career working on, I think, the most contentious issues that are there. And there are a couple of approaches and that are in the book that work really well. And those are, things like making sure you've got that full range of perspective in the room, starting out, with some time for people to get to know each other, going slow up front. And so we do something that we talk about, and it's very applicable to different settings, called a connecting question. So very often we do some version of sitting folks in a circle and asking them a really thoughtful question that leads to a good amount of vulnerability and self-disclosure. And that is huge in these processes for creating trust and creating deeper understanding that then leads to those solutions. So asking people to share a story, for example, on what life experience shaped your views on this issue and why, or what values most drive you when it comes to this issue and why, and going around the circle without a chance for interruption or dialogue so that folks really have a chance to be heard, to share these stories, to be humanized. And that's not to sort of take the heat out of it, really, it's to go to it, but in a constructive way, to let people share, to encourage people to share these deep feelings, these deep experiences. And when they do that, and then we create a container in which they're listened to and heard, it channels those strong passions around important issues in a constructive direction that can ultimately lead to, shared visions and solutions. Anything you would add to that, Rob?
No, I think that's great. I would simply say, Mariah is the skillful facilitator. I'm not so much a facilitator, but there's things you can do to take a time out, to go meet with someone individually and make sure they're being heard, and suggest ways they can come together. Sometimes they may have to take a couple of people to the side and have them talk to each other. I'm sure there are other tricks of the trade to allow the emotions to die down. Remember, it's not a terrible thing when emotions get high, and it shows how much people care. I thought I would just add one other thought, because Robert Larrick added another question about, can these ideas be applied on universities and school campuses? I'm jumping on that because that's a huge focus we have. We're already Convergence is central to a class at Ivy Tech in Indiana, and the professor Lynn Schock is on this call with us. And we're getting interest in law schools and business schools that the ideas we have are broadly applicable, that people need to learn these skills in order to deal with conflict wherever they are. And we think they can help people, students resolve conflicts. We think administrators find these skills helpful. There's a lot of contentious things that go on in the academic community, and we have a funny quote in the book about that. So I would just say, yes, one of our biggest goals is to get to young people who arrive these days a lot of times on campus with their minds made up, or having been on screens for a lot and sidelined by the pandemic, haven't necessarily had the sort of social exchange and interchange that a lot of us had in years past. And so getting to young people, to have them begin to entertain these mindsets, to begin to see people with greater tolerance and with greater curiosity, is a huge priority we have for the book. And we've purposely written it so it's not just about this year. It's not about the moment. It's not about toxic polarization in this moment. It's not about the presidential race. It's meant to be evergreen as a way to help people understand how they can work together more effectively across differences in this wide array of settings we've mentioned.
Mariah, can you elaborate a little bit more about the engagement with NYU?
Well, I'm sure no one is unfamiliar that this year was a tough year on college campuses. It's been tough for a while, but after October 7th and the war that began in Gaza, there were lots of protests on college campuses, and some of those led to, fairly disruptive protests, sometimes universities calling the police after many universities have kind of reckoned with the role of police on their campuses following the killing of George Floyd. So we've been working with some universities around those challenges, and we're doing that with NYU, who, to give them a little bit of a shout out, are doing all kinds of things. They're instituting a curriculum called Perspectives. It was made by one of our colleague organizations, the Constructive Dialogue Institute, to help young people be able to understand how perspective taking happens and how they can do it more effectively. They're having lots of community conversations and setting up various kinds of committees and trying to figure out how, as a community, they heal, establish norms, and disagree better, work together across their differences. And we're really we're loving being a part of that and playing a role in some of the really important work that they're doing there.
I think one of the things we have to talk about is media. And not because I've spent a good chunk of my career in the media, but because it's playing such a huge part in the polarization that we're experiencing. So how do we handle people getting news from the sources that basically reinforce what they already believe? How do you get to common ground when that's the media landscape that we live in? Rob, I'll let you solve that for us.
I was actually going to, since we recently did a project that's related to that, I thought maybe Mariah might take the lead, and then I'll try to act intelligent after that.
Right, he's passing the buck to you, so.
Yeah, I've done this kind of work for my whole career, and for many years, people have asked me, is it getting harder? Is it getting harder? And I'd say, like, not really. People still come together and do the same things, but in the last few years, I say, yes, it is getting harder. And there's a lot of reasons why we are feeling and are more divided. But I do think the media, the sort of the fractured media landscape that people can get their source of information from so many different sources in social media, does make it really hard for folks to have a shared understanding. And so a couple of things that I would say about that. One is, when we bring people together in the process itself, I would say it might sound counterintuitive, but I have found that it's not that important to build agreement on the facts. And not the facts don't matter, I'm not saying that, but when we come together around these shared goals, like providing health insurance for people who don't have it, like creating safe communities, whether this percentage of people get it this way or that way, or whether this thing happened in the past or didn't, is less important, I think, than doing the things that we've talked about so far that help people, excavate and uncover these shared goals and values that they have, find the things that they have in common, listen to each other about where they have different perspectives without necessarily needing to land on the facts and agree. There are times when working through the facts matters and is important, but I think it's more about building those relationships, understanding people's perspectives, and then they're often able to find pathways to those shared goals, even without, excavating and aligning on every single detail there. And the last thing that I would say is just always encouraging people to do our best. And it's hard for all of us these days to get outside of our bubbles. And it's one thing to listen to different media, which I think is important, but it's not nearly as powerful, as Rob said, as hearing from people directly who have different perspectives and experiences than us. So just always the processes that we set up do that for people, but encouraging people to try to go outside their bubbles, find and hang out with people who think differently, and see what you learn and what your experience of that is like.
So Rob, you expand upon that, maybe you can also address this new question that's coming up from Sean. Any new thoughts on how to bring collaborative problem solving leadership into politics at the elections level? The other day, I met a constituent who was absolutely baffled by the idea that my platform for city council is based on common ground needs. He wanted me to fight rather than collaborate. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and yes, I will get to that. Sean's a dear friend and actually running for office as a common ground kind of guy. I was just going to add to what Mariah said. No, I've already forgotten what the topic was. What we were just talking about. I guess get off that.
Media and facts.
Oh yeah. So I was just going to say I'm with Mariah on the facts, that it is better if you have agreement on facts, if at all possible. And I'd also say, to the extent there's people who are sort of outright lying, then you can't really deal with that very well. But just give you an example. So for instance, you could have people come together, some of whom believe that climate change is an existential challenge to the world, and others who may not, who think it's greatly overstated, but they could still have a conversation on sensible energy policy. And they could have that conversation without necessarily agreeing on all the facts, because they, underneath it all, they probably have some common goals about, you know, the quality of energy and the cost of energy and the availability of energy. So it may not be a perfect answer, but I'd say that yes, there are times when competing facts can get in the way, but most of the time our groups develop such respect, they listen to each other, they may bring different experts in, we may bring different experts in, and usually though, we're close enough so that you can have conversations that go somewhere. Sean, I don't know the answer fully, other than people need role models, and people need role models to see that collaborative leadership actually does work. And there are some people who are modeling that in Congress today. Derek Kilmer, who's a good friend and endorsed the book and is about to step down after many years, modeled that in his bipartisan working group in the House and in the Select Committee on Modernization in the House. And so I think at some point, we just have to begin to show that collaborative leadership works, and that it's a great alternative to just adversarial approaches. And that in the long run, it actually builds comity and lowers polarization, and it builds relationship across differences, something everyone wants. People are really tired, sick and tired of how divided we are. They're tired of how it infuses their lives, even at the local level, the community level. And so we need that kind of leadership. We need that kind of model. I don't want to overstate it, but certainly Nelson Mandela is a model of someone who moved his country out of such dire adversarial situations to a point where people really wanted to work together better. So I don't have a full answer for you today, but I do think this book, more stories, more people who are inspired to become collaborative leaders. There are people who do training for future political leaders. That it's just great. And the more people at higher levels to get elected and model this, and the public begins to see that, I hope there'll be thousands of imitators out there who say, yeah, I'm about this. I'm going to help solve problems in a way that works for the widest swath of people possible. I have my own views, and my own views need to be incorporated in that consensus, but there's plenty of room for people to add to what I know. So that's the only answer I have for now. I'll turn it to Mariah.
So let me jump in here, please, for a minute. So I want to talk about Congress for a moment, since we're talking about politics and elections. And I know that Convergence has done some work with Congress. So I'd like for you to, Rob, you might want to start this one, to talk about, you know, the work that has been done with the bipartisan congressional committee.
Working group, yes. Yeah.
Bipartisan working group, to talk a little bit about that and the response that Convergence received in going through this process, and how hopefully it is beginning to permeate even the tiniest bit through Congress. So talk a little bit about the work there.
Well, let me give some broad outlines. I think Mariah may have more to add from recent years as well, but we formed a relationship when I was still CEO with Derek Kilmer and with Andy Barr, the ranking Republican on the co-chair of the bipartisan working group. He's from Kentucky. And they really welcomed our help. And we helped them try to see all sides of issues. We helped them bring in speakers, and we helped and spoke to them about our approach. And I believe they really tried to internalize where they wanted to go. At one point, because they don't have time to do the kind of careful planning and thinking. That's why the members of Congress don't normally sit at our tables. We actually facilitated a retreat of the bipartisan working group where they reached agreement on what they wanted to work on. And at one point, a very emotional moment, where one member of Congress talked about how, I think it's his daughter-in-law, who was a dreamer, and how she was sent out for the country. And I can't recall if he was a Democrat or Republican, but people were they were bonding. And so I think we've helped show this group some ways to get connected and have better conversations. I'd also mention that under my successor, David Eisner, I'm pretty sure it was for this group, and maybe the Select Committee on Modernization, again through Derek Kilmer, there were terribly bad feelings, as you can imagine, after January 6th. And we, along with David Fairman, who's one of our lead facilitators at the Consensus Building Institute, did a session where we helped people after the terrible concerns and high emotions after January 6th about some members of Congress not voting to certify the election and so on, really allowed people to go much deeper. And at a time when that group was threatening to fracture in terms of how they work together, to rebuild some relationships of trust and understand why people voted the way they did in certain ways. And that group then continued to function. So those are some examples, and let me just turn to Mariah to see what I've forgotten.
I'll just add that I worked for many years facilitating and sort of staffing something called first was called the Bipartisan Caucus, then the Civility Caucus at the Minnesota State Legislature. And what I was so struck by is that we would hold gatherings for them, and half, 2/3 sometimes of the legislature would turn out. And these were very partisan people. They were elected officials. And to a person, we're saying, we don't like it like this. This doesn't feel good. It's not productive. We want it to be different. And I think the struggle is that there's a lot of headwinds that divide our politicians even more than our, average citizen. And all of the structures move them in different directions. They sit in different sections. They have offices on different floors because of sunshine laws. They don't socialize, the thing people have heard about as much. And I think for the most part, they, like most of us, want to be in positive relationships, want to solve problems. They didn't get elected to fight. They got elected to change things, and they need more supports and structures to help them do that. And so we have at Convergence tried to provide some of that. There are phenomenal other groups, the Problem Solvers Caucus, the Future Caucus, National Institute for Civil Discourse, others doing important work here. And many years ago, Rob tried to create this infrastructure within Congress when he then, Convergence ended up being his second choice, almost got a bill across the finish line. And the office that I ran in Minnesota was a part of government there. So, infrastructure to help our policymakers collaborate, just like the rest of us need supports and being able to work together across our differences.
That's a perfect segue into one of the questions that was submitted earlier. Is there any initiative in Congress today or in a state legislature that you would consider a model for how to use your collaborative problem-solving techniques?
I'm not aware of it. We did get some attention from, I think, the Select Committee on Modernization for this idea, which I had worked on years ago, called the U.S. Consensus Council. So I'm not aware of any efforts now, although I think they did make a recommendation that the Congress should entertain using mediators more often to resolve disputes. And of course, the average member of Congress, probably with some justification, but a little bit of hubris, thinks that they're the best negotiator ever, and they may not need outside help. But as we all know, it's always useful to have outside people help you. Sadly, I'd also say that some of the efforts at the state level, I'm glad that Mariah's office continues in Minnesota, but when I started Convergence, I learned from people who ran the North Dakota Consensus Council and the Montana Consensus Council, and they had done very successful work at the state level to do these things, but I believe both entities no longer exist. They were out of either universities or private, so they didn't have government support, and so support for this is an important idea, and then political leadership is important. One of the people who helped start the Montana Consensus Council is one of the main endorsers of our book, former Republican Governor Marc Racicot, who later chaired the Republican National Committee for George W. Bush. But Marc at heart is a bridge builder. And so because he was a governor supporting this, as Governor Dayton did in Minnesota, it got some traction. So again, it gets down to leadership. I think it gets down to some credible people talking to others to say, this isn't soft, this isn't naive, this isn't just kumbaya. It's not just for patient, nice people who are polite to each other. It's really quite hard-nosed in terms of its approach, and it brings results. And so we are, as a prior questioner mentioned, we are looking for political leaders who will take the leap. But at any given day, the higher priority is to go to battle or to win an election or to deal with the exigencies of the moment. So these kinds of institutional reforms come much more slowly.
We are almost out of time, and I want to give each of you an opportunity to just generally tell us what you want people to take away from this book and what your message is to those who are disillusioned by the division and the polarization that we are experiencing in our society today. In other words, give us some hope, would you please? Mariah, why don't you pick it up first?
Sure. Well, I think I hope that our experience gives people hope, because we have been able to do this work day in and day out for years and seen it's not all kumbaya. I don't mean to say that, but really almost every time folks form more trust, have better relationships, go on to continue to work together and to come up with these types of higher ground solutions on really our most difficult issues. And so not only can it be done, it is being done, and not just by us, but by other groups and many other people out there who we have been fortunate to partner with, work together, and learn from. So it is possible. We hope that the book provides more people with that inspiration and tools to recognize that our divisions can be sources of strength, the places that we see things differently, but that in many ways we're not as divided as it seems. And our experience and polling and other things show that we're greatly overestimating the differences that we have, and that people can come together and form relationships and form solutions of mutual benefit and these higher ground types of solutions. So it can be done. We feel so lucky to get to be a part of doing it. And we hope that we have provided more people with more tools so that more of it can take place in our world. Rob?
Yeah, so thanks. And Linda, thanks for such a skillful job facilitating this. Look, first, I think people should take hope, because although not every project has all the impact I'd want it to have, I didn't really finish up the earlier healthcare story, which it led almost immediately. It set the groundwork for immediate growth in coverage of children, healthcare coverage for children. And although the Affordable Care Act eventually went a little further than what our consensus was, it actually helped design the architecture, and I think probably was a factor in allowing groups that have been at war on healthcare to contribute to a better design of the Affordable Care Act. So the reason to have hope is that actually things happen. It's not just about building relationships, which are really important, but changes occur. And we've seen it for virtually every project we've done. Some level of impact occurs. So what we'd like people to take away is that you really can solve intractable and difficult problems in all aspects of life collaboratively, that you can do so without compromising your values and principles. As long as you find some areas of common ground you work on, you can continue to fight about everything else. And that there really are proven approaches, not just by us. We have many other friends, other practitioners, even on this call, who've put this into effect. It's just it hasn't become a cultural norm yet. And we would like to create a groundswell of people using these approaches, not only to solve problems more effectively, but as I said before, because we think it will help lower the temperature, especially when you convene groups that are very influential, have a lot of followers, and they begin to have a different experience about what it means to talk to the other side and to do things together. I think it can make a measurable contribution to shifting the culture and hopefully implementing a new sense of values about how we treat each other and how we work together to solve problems.
Well, Rob and Mariah, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody who joined the call. And I love these questions we're getting. First of all, how can we help? Buy the book, and buy the book for your friends and share it widely, for sure. We have a question about, I know there's going to be a Kindle edition coming up soon. Question is no audio version as of yet. We will keep you posted on that. The other thing I'd like to say is please consider making a donation to Convergence. The work that we're doing is so needed right now, and we would greatly appreciate any financial support that you might be able to offer. And I can't think of anything else unless Rob, Mariah, I'll give you guys the last word. I just wanted to make sure everybody knows how appreciative we are of their taking time out of their day to join us.
Thank you so much, Linda, for moderating, Rob, for so many years of collaboration, all of you for being here and being a part of our community. And for those of you who are new to us, Doozy just linked lots of ways to get involved with us beyond the book. There's so many ways to partner with us and collaborate and share these tools. And we hope that you will. And thank you all for your time today.
I agree. Thank you to everybody for showing up, giving us of your time. If you think of places, podcasts or audiences where you think people would like to hear about this, we'd love to hear about that. We'd love to get word out. And as I say, we're in it for the long haul. This isn't a 6-month effort. We hope for years to come. This book and the ideas of what Convergence does and our learning laboratory, we hope will make a huge difference in spreading the use of collaborative problem solving. Thanks again, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a terrific day, and we'll be in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.